the CIDRA o yung kung tinatawag natin na Climate and Disaster Assessment. So, ang pag-mainstream po ng DRR and CCA concern sa ating pong local planning process is not a new concept at all. Kasi po ever since the enactment of landmark legislation, which is yung pong ating Republic Act 9729 o yung ating Climate Change Act of 2009 and RA 10121 o yung ating National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010, ay meron na pong attempts ang ating mga local government units to actually incorporate or integrate yung climate change action and adaptation and disaster risk management in the local plans. This is evident po dun sa aming mga na-check na CDPs wherein there are actual use of CCA, DRM data doon po sa pag-identify nila ng kanilang mga TPAs and interventions para po doon sa kanilang LDIP. Now, bakit po kailangan natin pag-usapan yung climate and disaster risk assessment and actual mainstreaming? Because there are compelling reasons why we need to involve yung CCA and DRM data sa ating mga local development plans, especially now that we are experiencing yung pong global pandemic, which is COVID-19, and we are constant parang customer po pagdating sa mga hazards na dumarating sa ating bansa. Our country is strategically located doon po sa location kung saan very vulnerable po tayo sa mga disasters. We are located in the Pacific Ring of Fire. We are also at the Typhoon Belt. So napakalaking issue po or concern ang DRM sa development pathways po na tinatahak ng ating mga local government units sa ating bansa. Okay. So, noon pa man po ay ginagawa na po natin itong mainstreaming ng CCA and DRR dun sa ating plans, especially yung kung ating comprehensive land use plan na kung saan ay meron pong separate supplemental guidelines ang HRURV in the mainstreaming of CIDRA dun po sa ating CLUP. And now we are talking about the CDP, which is yung diniscuss nga po kanina ni Ma'am Sydney, kung saan ay ito po ay tinatawag natin CDP Plus because moving forward, we are actually needing the LGUs to incorporate yung pong CCA and DRR dun sa kanilang plano. Sabi nga po kanina ni Ma'am Sydney na napakatagal na po natin nagplano sa the local level, but doon sa panahon na tayo ay nagpaplano, it is just today, ngayong recent years natin na unti-unting nare-realize na kinakailangan natin bigyan ng particular attention yun pong pagtugon sa mga disasters brought about by natural and human-induced hazards. Now, ano po ba yung purpose natin? Bakit natin kinakailangan i-mainstream yung CIDRA into the CLUP and CDP? Of course, number one is to better understand natural hazards and yung climate change and how this would likely alter development path of the locality. Each year po ay nakakaranas tayo sa ating bansa ng iba't ibang klase ng hazards which can bring yung ating mga disasters. And this affects how the LGUs approach development. Kasi much of the funding po ng ating mga local government units ay nare-redirect doon sa response sa upang tugunan yung ating yung adverse effects ng mga hazards na ito sa ating mga localities. And in fact, we have an appropriation nga po of 5% dun sa ating local funds for just to address the impacts of these hazards in our communities. Number two is for us to better understand the risk posed by natural hazards and climate change on exposed areas, sectors, and communities. So basically, what we are aiming for is to identify sino-sino ba yung mga vulnerable communities, sino-sino ba yung mga taong mas higit na maapektuhan ng mga natural hazards and yung climate change, especially yung ating marginalized sectors and other sectors of the community. And number three is, of course, to identify yung priority decision areas because given the limited resources na meron tayo sa ating LGUs, we have to properly prioritize sino-sino lang ba yung kailangan natin bigyan ng intervention depending on their vulnerabilities and their adaptive capacity. Next is to determine realistic projections on demand and supply of land. This is why in our ecological profile, it is also important that yung SIDRA po natin is embedded doon po sa ating ecological profile because we can determine for future years ano ba yung magiging demand and of course yung supply ng ating spatial territories kung gaano pa kalayo yung development na pwede natin gawin sa ating mga LGUs. This will depend upon how vulnerable and what are the risks present in our localities. And another thing is to incorporate spatial sectoral development goals, objectives, and targets to reduce risk and vulnerabilities. So yun naman po yung target natin sa pag-mainstream ng CCE and DRR dun sa ating local development plans ay para po mapababa natin yung mga vulnerabilities ng ating community, especially yung mga taong mas maapektuhan kapag itong mga hazards dito ay tumama sa ating area of responsibility and para makapag-identify na rin po tayo ng mga mas responsive na mga PPAs para doon sa ating clientele o yung ating mga citizens. And of course, ultimately, what we want to achieve is to make informed decisions to effectively address risks and vulnerabilities. If we have a comprehensive data on climate change and the disasters that is present in our area, then we can better address yung mga vulnerabilities na ito, yung mga hazards na ito through the decision making, which is again dependent upon our local government leaders. So, and penultimately, SIDRA is used to identify appropriate risk reduction and climate change adaptation and mitigation measures as inputs to the comprehensive development planning and investment programming. So, at the end of our session po, hanggang matapos itong activity natin, what we want to achieve para sa ating mga local government units ay hindi lamang po tayo makapag-create ng isang development plan na comprehensive, but then again we are considering yung magiging effect ng pagbabago ng ating climate, thus bringing us extreme weather events which can lead or which can impede nga po yung ating development kasi nga during the past years we are so much invested upon addressing yung pong disaster response, but we are slowly and progressively moving on to preventing them. Hindi man natin maiwasan, totally maiwasan, ay malesen po natin yung adverse impacts nito sa ating mga local government. units. Now, sinabi po kanina na ang climate and disaster risk assessment ay pwede rin po natin gamitin dito sa mga plans na ito. So, sa local government, we can use SIDRA. So, andyan po yung ating Local Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan and the Local Climate Change Action Plan. So, hindi naman po bago ito sa atin. If you are involved po sa planning nitong dalawang sub-plans na ito, siguro ay napagdaanan na po natin yung proseso kung paano po natin ginagawa yung SIDRA. Only that this time, we will use the results, yung SIDRA results, we will use the tool to mainstream po yung DRR and CCA concerns doon po sa ating main plan, sa ating LGU, which is the Comprehensive Development Plan, thus making it yung pong tinatawag nating risk-informed CDP. And of course, ang climate and disaster risk assessment po is pwede rin natin gamitin ang ating mga LGUs to avail yung tinatawag nating People Survival Fund, which is a allocation na nasa ating agenda. Now, when we talk about the climate change and disaster risk assessment, hindi po natin pwedeng pag-usapan yung isa without referring to the other one because these two are intimately related. When we say intimately related, the variability of another can cause, yung changes to the other. For example, yung ating pong pagbabago sa climate can lead to extreme weather events which of course heightens yung risk na pwedeng maranasan ng ating mga communities, ng ating mga kababayan especially. Now, when we talk about the interrelation between climate change adaptation and disaster risk management, so makikita po natin na ina-address nila, the other one, the climate change adaptation provided information for us to better understand what are the disaster risks. For example, sea level rise po. There are studies around the world na nagkakaroon po ng significant change in sea level rise which can affect, of course, in our coastal community. I've read an article about Sri Lanka which projects that in the next years to come, ay magsasabdak po or lulubog yung part of the land area of that small country, and significantly mababawasan yung kanilang land area habitable. So these are the things that we may need to consider in planning, especially that yung pong ating pagpaplano is long term, and we are actually viewing yung future demand. For example, yung ating land area, how are we going to proceed with the development. Hindi naman po tayo magtatayo ng commercial area, for example, in a location na laging binabaha, or there are studies na yung location na yun ay may risk, for example, yung landslides natin. So we are not pursuing those kind of things given the data. At ito po ay makukuha natin using the SIDRA tool, which can provide valuable information na pwede po nating magamit for decision making. Of course, yung changes in the mean temperature, ayun pong mga nararanasan nating extreme weather events, just like El Nino, which is almost always associated with rising temperatures, but siguro kakaunti yung nakakaalam na with the rise of the temperatures, nagdudulot din naman ito ng extreme precipitations during the wet season, and yun pong ating mga typhoons and cyclones ay mas lumalakas, brought about by these weather events or climate differences or variabilities. Of course, yung changes in precipitations, this can affect not only yung social aspect of our communities, but then yun pong ating economic development. Why? An example of which is yun pong ating planting season. This is a primary concern of the agriculture sector. There are areas wherein before nakakapag tatlong cropping season sila, but now because of the changes in precipitation, it's either bumaba or tumaas. Kapag bumaba, sa isang taon, isa na lang yung cropping season nila. For some other areas na hindi naman dati inuulan, they cannot proceed with their usual agricultural practices. So na-affect kanilang production. Therefore, nagta-translate ito dun sa other problems, just like yung employment and yung gross domestic product po ng region na affected. So yun nga, extreme weather events with increased frequency and severity. It's either increase or decrease yung frequency, pero habang bumababa po yung dalas ng extreme weather events ay lumalakas naman lalo yung mga hazards na ito, just like what we are experiencing for the past years. We faced Yolanda and the recent typhoons na nagkaroon tayo, and even yung mga tropical depressions po, if you will notice, ngayon poses risk na rin. While before, natatandaan ko, back then, kapag sinabing signal number 3, these are typhoons na manageable pa during those times. But today, hindi na ganun. Pagka sinabing signal number 3 is not hindi na siya palagi ang ginagamit. Ang ginagamit natin ngayon is yung tropical cyclone signal, which is yung sa lakas na noong gustiness ng wind and some other aspects of the typhoon, just like yung precipitation, yung value, kung gaano kadaming ulan yung ibabagsak. So we are faced with those kinds of changes na kailangan nating harapin sa ating mga LGUs. And when we talk about disasters management, so again, bumabalik po tayo doon sa climate and weather-related events which affects our immediate, katulad ng mga bagyo, mga drought, and other natural calamities. And of course, yung geophysical events natin. Now, in a nutshell, climate and disaster risk assessment is the study of the risk and vulnerabilities of the exposed elements associated with natural hazards and climate change. Yun nga po, it identifies the decision areas that needs to be addressed and given acceptable or tolerable levels of risk. So there are instances na yung ating locality, yung ating location ay exposed sa risk, but it depends upon the levels. Ano po, kung pwede pa ba natin siyang i-utilize for development? Are there any mitigation practices that we may adopt for us to negate the adverse impacts? Ano po yung negative impacts of that risk na meron dun sa lugar na yon, so we can proceed with development So this can be derived from the SIDRA. So makikita po natin yan because there are levels of risk na pwede nating ma-identify for that specific location. And of course, ano-ano ba yung mga mitigation practices, yun nga, yung mga programs and projects na pwede nating pursue given that levels of risk. Okay, so ang particular focus po natin dito is first and foremost yung ating population. We have to identify sino-sino ba yung mga tao na mas affected given their vulnerabilities and their adaptive capacity, because as we were oriented before in several DRR courses or activities, nag-iiba-iba po yung capacity and vulnerabilities ng ating mga kababayan. Mas vulnerable po syempre yung mga namumuhay under the poverty threshold, yung mga bata, yung mga senior citizens, yung mga PWDs natin. So these are the sectors which needs particular focus. Ano po? So priority pagdating sa development planning because they are the most affected. Of course, yung urban use areas natin, katulad ng nasabi ko kanina, we are integrating yung ating CDP, or we are mainstreaming yung ating SIDRA sa ating CLUP basically because we want to properly determine ano yung tile ng land natin sa ating LGU, yung pwede nating i-utilize for different kinds of activities, or yung commercial areas natin. Siyempre, hindi naman natin ilalagay yan doon sa high-risk areas because these areas are the backbone of development ng ating LGU. Of course, pag pinag-uusapan po natin ang climate change and hazards and disasters, ay affected din po dyan yung ating natural resource-based production areas. Yung nasabi natin kanina, yung ating agriculture, which are sa atin pong bansa, yan pa rin naman po yung pinakamalaking portion of economic activity na meron, especially in the rural areas. Most people in the rural areas are dependent upon agricultural production. So the risk posed by natural hazards and climate change has mas mataas yung effect sa kanila kumpara doon sa mga tao na naninirahan doon sa ating mga urban areas. And of course, yung ating lifeline utilities, kapag ang ating mga lifeline utilities, especially yung ating mga roads, ay tinamaan ng disasters, this can also hamper yung development. Sabi nga natin, kapag walang matinong kalsada o sira yung kalsada dahil tinamaan ng isang extreme event, ay babagal yung daloy ng komersyo doon sa lugar, and we can expect that this will trickle down to the effects, especially doon sa mga tao na naninirahan doon sa lugar na yon. So, kinakailangan masustain po natin yung mga lifeline utilities. That is why, after magkaroon ng bagyo, ano po ba yung una natin mga nire-restore? Yung mga kalsada, di po nag-clearing agad tayo. Yung mga power lines natin, yun agad yung tinitingnan or pinaprioritize basically because these are the main drivers of economic development dun sa ating mga localities. And of course, yung critical point facilities like schools, and ito po yung mga infrastructure na kinakailangan agad natin na ma-restore for us to return to the normal functioning of our communities. Yung ating mga commercial areas and other critical infrastructure na meron po tayo sa ating LGUs. Now, as I have mentioned earlier, although climate change and disaster risk are two separate principles, they are intimately related. That is why we cannot do away discussing disaster risk assessment without first referring to climate change vulnerability assessment, because what is the use of identifying ano yung levels of risk kung hindi naman natin mapipinpoint sino-sino yung mga tao, ano-anong mga lugar, ano-anong activities yung may mataas na levels of risk. And this boils down to the information that we can derive from these two separate assessment. So in the climate change vulnerability assessment, so meron po tayong mga climate projections, meron po tayong data from Pag-asa DOST on the mean temperature, rainfall, and extreme events and sea level rise for the coming year. So these are projections to help us determine ano po ba yung mga expected weather patterns for the seasonal or the seasonal changes that we can experience in our localities, in our LGUs. Given those projections, what are we gonna do about it? Ano po ba yung pwede nating gawin? Kasi hindi naman natin ito mababago. We cannot influence yung climate. Therefore, what we can only do is to adapt. So, paano po ba tayo mag-adapt doon sa variability in our climate? Of course, we will tailor fit our development plans, our programs, and projects and activities para makasabay po tayo doon sa changing climate patterns natin. And of course, after we identify ano po ba yung mga projection on the climate change, then we formulate climate impact chains. So, i-identify po natin yung ating mga areas of interest. So, andyan yung forest, agriculture. So, this can be further narrowed down into subsystems or sub-interest. For example, in agriculture, we can pinpoint ano po ba yung mga crops na gusto nating pag-aralan using the climate impact chain. For example, palay planting or yung ating mga high-value crops. And this can provide valuable information. Paano po ba tayo mag-strategize sa ating agriculture sector so that we can negate or mitigate yung effect ng changing climate patterns natin. And of course, this impacts yung ating areas of interest, which are the population, yung kaninang na-discuss natin, yung urban use, natural resources, lifeline utilities, and critical points. The only difference is that yung climate change po, this is gradual. So hindi po agad natin ito may experience. So dahan-dahan po natin itong mararamdaman, but yung hazards po almost immediately, yung effects niya ay andyan na agad. So makikita po agad natin. But it does not mean that may particular focus tayo dun sa climate risk assessment, because as we have said earlier, climate change contributes dun nga po sa nangyayaring extreme events na nararanasan ng ating mga LGUs. Now, when we talk about how are we going to compute for the relative vulnerability and risk ng ating mga areas, we are brought to this formula, which is yung vulnerability assessment po natin is the function of exposure times sensitivity over adaptive capacity. So yung exposure is ito po yung extent of or degree of which the elements at risk are likely to experience hazard events of different magnitudes. So depende po sa location kung depende po sa location ang exposure. For example, those coastal barangays, those coastal communities are mas mataas po yung kanilang exposure doon sa hazards natin ng storm surge, while those communities po na nasa mountainous area, sila naman po yung mas mataas ang exposure pagdating sa mga landslides and similar kinds of disasters. Now, when we talk about sensitivity po naman, this is the degree to which a system is affected either adversely or beneficially by climate-related stimuli. So we are not just talking about the adverse effects, pwede din naman kasing may beneficial effect yung isang climate stimuli. And of course, yung adaptive capacity, this pertains to the inherent capacity of a system to negate the adverse effect of a disaster event. So exposure sensitivity po, exposure and sensitivity, this provides us with a degree of impact of climate change doon sa ating affected system. And para naman po makompute natin yung risk, this is a function of hazard times exposure times vulnerability. So we are referring to unang-una yung severity of consequence depending upon the level of a disaster event. If it is extreme, therefore yung severity of consequence po ay tumataas din, and yung likelihood of occurrence. So mas madalas, mas malaki yung effect nito doon sa ating mga communities. So yan po yung ginagamit nating formula for us to compute yung pong risk natin is yung likelihood of occurrence. Again, yung likelihood of occurrence and severity of consequence, we will discuss further po doon sa ating CIDRA steps. Okay. Now, when we look at our conceptual framework based on the assessment report 5, yun nga po, the climate as signal or climate stimuli and the interaction between the different elements, which are exposure, hazard, and vulnerability, brings about or brings us to the computation or identification of the particular risk noong ating mga decision areas, noong ating mga areas of concern, of interest. So kung mas mababa po yung levels ng ating hazards, yung intensity ng ating hazards, o konti din lang po yung exposed, yung sensitivity is pababa din, and inversely yung ating adaptive capacity o yung coping capacity natin mataas, then therefore yung risk po natin is pumababa. So it all depends upon the interrelationship between these principles that we identify. Ano po ba yung levels ng risk ng ating mga areas of interest. Now we will go to the process of the CIDRA formulation. We will not thoroughly discuss these processes, but we will just go dun sa overview po nitong process na ito. If you will notice dun sa presentation ni Ma'am Sydney kaninang umaga, 6 steps po ito. Basically because dun sa step 4 po natin, yung CCBA and yung DRA natin, dito ay pinag-isa na lang po natin yung sa Conduct Climate and Disaster Risk Assessment. So kanina naman the same level din lang po siya. So yung step 1 po natin is to collect and organize climate change and hazard information. Of course, the backbone of local development planning is yung pagbubuo po ng isang comprehensive database and pag-collect ng information. Kung wala po tayong information, hindi po tayo makakapag-proceed doon sa ating formulation ng CDP, basically because wala tayong information on what is the current reality doon po sa ating local level, kung wala po tayong information and data. And then step 2, we scope the potential impacts of hazards and climate change. We are looking into the effects na po ng mga brought about by natural hazards and of course yung pong climate change upon the processing and analysis po ng data na na-collect natin from step 1, and then we create a exposure database. We formulate maps and other information system which we can readily use. So yung pong data, pag pinasas po natin, we can develop databases which we can readily use po sa lahat ng ating planning endeavors involving CCA and DRR. So isa na lang po yung pwede na yung pagbabasihan natin. Basically, isang ecological profile na lang po yung ating gagamitin for all our sub-plans, the LDRRM plan, the LCCAP, CLUP, and of course yung ating pong CDP. And then we summarize findings. When we summarize findings, we can now pinpoint ano po ba yung mga decision areas natin. Decision areas are particular areas for intervention. So ito na po yung mga target. Dito po natin pwedeng makita sino ba yung mga pwede nating target beneficiaries of our programs, projects, and activities depending upon the levels of risk na meron itong mga decision areas na ito. Decision areas can be in the form of smaller units po, which are the barangays. So yan po, mamaya makikita po natin yung mga process na yan. Okay, so yung step 1, again, this is the gathering of climate change information and characterizing hazards affecting the municipality. So dito po ay nag-establish tayo ng information. So nagko-collect po tayo ng data. This can be in the form of local climate change projection. So it's like what we have said earlier, meron na pong nilabas ang DOST Pag-asa na climate change projection for the whole country. So this is I think good for the next 10 to 20 years pa yung projections. So ito po pwede po natin gamitin as part of our CDRA. And then inventory po ng mga natural hazards and their characteristics, tabular compilation of historical disaster damage loss data, and of course yung summary ng barangay level hazard inventory. Publication ng DOST Pag-asa, this is a compilation of the climate change projection for each region and province in the country. So kung gusto po nating i-specify pa para sa ating municipality, maybe we can coordinate with our local pag-asa in our respective provinces. Alam ko po meron at least isa at the provincial level, but ito po kasing climate change projection, malawak po ito, so hindi po masyadong nagkakaiba pagdating sa mga municipalities. At least yung region is may differences pagdating po doon sa climate change scenario, but in the case of the municipalities, very little po. So, but it's up to you po if you want to have a much detailed information on the climate change projection ng inyong municipality if it is available in your local pag-asa office po. So dito po is tinitingnan natin yung seasonal temperature, yung seasonal rainfall, frequency of extreme events, and of course yung sea level rise kasama din po dyan. So this can provide us with valuable information and data that we can use to address yung pong effects and proceed with the implementation of our infrastructure projects to better address yung pong concerns natin about the effects of climate change. So ayan po. Yun. So in that inventory of climate change projection, what you can see are these graphs po na nagpapakita kung gaano kataas or ano yung changes na mararanasan ng ating mga regions, ng ating localities, given, for example, a 1% degree centigrade of change in temperature for the coming decade. So, meron din po tayong tinatawag na RCP. RCP is representative concentration pathways. These are emission scenarios na ginagamit to project yung temperature for the years to come. So, pagka po RCP 8.5 or yung high emission scenario, ibig sabihin if we are status quo in the activities that we are usually doing in our LGU, for example, in industrial areas, kung ang kanila pong activities, industries, for example, is parang business as usual, so definitely mas mataas yung emission scenario, and this will in turn project a much higher projection po pagdating doon sa increase in temperature for the coming years. So yung RCP 4.5 is the moderate emission scenario, given the different factors, interventions that we can adopt to mitigate or to lessen the impact or lessen the variability of the temperature. So ayan po yung ginagamit natin for the climate change projection. Of course, we can also gather or formulate an inventory of hazards and yung kanilang characteristics. So we can use yung ating pong mga thematic maps. So as you can see here, andyan po yung landslide susceptibility map ng isang LGU, Jose Panganiban and Calibigaho, saka Camarines Norte Province. So I guess ang ating naman pong mga LGUs ay may mga ganitong klase ng thematic maps. So we can use them, we can inlay different maps for us to identify. Pagka po in-inlay natin, makikita natin ano-ano ba yung mga areas natin sa ating LGU na na vulnerable sa flooding, sa landslides, sa storm surge, and so forth. Now, when we do the inventory of hazards and their characteristics, we define ano po ba yung spatial extent. So, pag sinabing spatial extent, these are areas within the municipality and certain barangays that are likely to be inundated or affected by a particular hazard. So, gaano po ba kalawak yung maapektuhan, yung magnitude and intensity, gaano po ba katindi, gaano kalakas, or ano po ba yung intensity ng mararanasang hazard doon sa particular area na yon, yung frequency and probability of occurrence. This refers to the likelihood or the average recurrence interval. So this can range from annual to hundred of years. Just like yung atin pong nararanasan ngayon na pandemic. The last time this happened was in 1918 to 1920. So almost 100 years po yung nakalipas. So we are caught off guard na hindi natin ito napag-uusapan pagdating sa disaster risk assessment in the past years, and we are quite certain na sa next mainstreaming siguro ng DRR sa ating mga development plans ay nandun na yung pandemic response. Of course, yung duration, gaano ba katagal yung nararanasang hazards. So this can be expressed in minutes, days, and weeks. And predictability. So this refers to the ability of human systems, technologies to accurately determine when a hazard might occur, including its characteristics. So ngayon, we have advanced technologies pagdating po sa forecasting ng weather events, ng typhoons, and so forth. In fact, we are hailed across the world because pagdating po sa weather forecasting, top-notch daw po ang Pilipinas pagdating sa ganitong klase ng discipline, basically because we recognize the fact that these hazards plays important role in the development pathways na meron tayo or tinatahak ng ating mga local governments. That is why it's essential that we can prevent, or kung hindi man natin mahadlangan, is malesen natin yung impact nito sa ating mga LGUs. And yung speed of onset, if this disaster happens, gaano po ba kabilis? Ano po? Gaano ba siya kabilis tumama? Is it fast or slow creeping? So, yan po ay pwede rin nating ilagay doon sa mabubuo nating inventory of hazards and their characteristics. Now, this is an example of the historical disaster damage loss data. So, andyan po yung hazard events and descriptions, ano mga barangays yung affected, ilan yung namatay, ilan yung injured, ilan yung missing. The only problem with this, formulating this inventory is kadalasan po ay dahil sa tagal na nung event na yon, nawawala na yung information, wala na yung data. So what can we use to come up with this kind of inventory? Pwede rin po yung mga kwento-kwento ng ating mga nakatatanda, but we have, as much as possible, we have to provide numerical data para po mas specific, mas detailed yung information na makukuha natin para sa historical inventory ng ating mga hazards. So dito nililist lang natin po siya. And then this can provide valuable information, especially in yung interval na po-project natin in how many years this kind of event will happen again. So dito po most likely makikita natin yung mga ganong klase ng information. Of course, we also have the summary of barangay level hazard inventory matrix. This is just a parang inventory po nung lahat ng hazards na meron tayo sa ating LGU, and then identify ano ba yung present per barangay. So yan po, nilalagyan lang natin ang in-identify lang natin. So nag-iiba-iba din po ito, depende doon sa location ng barangay. Yung mga coastal barangay natin, so they are exposed to the storm surges and other related hazards, while yung kung nasa mountainous yun nga, mga landslides and other kinds of similar hazards po na meron. And then after that, after we collect the data, we now scope the potential impacts of yung climate change and disasters. So ang output po natin dito is a summary of potential climate change impacts and potential exposed units, and yung ating mga impact chain diagrams. It depends upon yun po kung gaano ito karami, especially if you are if you want to focus on particular areas of interest, agriculture, population, and all the subsystems na meron po yung mga interest na yun. So this step takes off from the gathering of climate and climate change and hazard and disaster information. So yung step 1, so kapag wala po tayo nung step 1, we cannot proceed with this basically because lack of data means we cannot we cannot provide assumptions on what will be the possible impacts if wala naman po tayong basis. So yung rough mapping of potential and existing impacts using impact chain diagrams or tables, and determine yung climate change stimuli or hazards which will affect key sectors, so it can be studied further in the DRR and CCVA. So ito pong data na kinolect natin from the first step will provide useful information na pwede po natin gamitin doon sa ating step 4, which is the DRA and or CCVA. So this is an example of the climate change impact using the CLIRAM tool. So this is the climate information risk assessment matrix tool. So dito makikita po natin yung precipitation. Yes, this is an information about the precipitation doon sa isang particular location of interest. So andito yung mga seasons, and using the two different scenarios, emission scenarios. So meron po tayong RCP 4.5 and 8.5. And using that, we can refer na po doon sa information about patterns of changes. So how much rainfall are we going to experience given this particular emission scenario. So this can be used po doon sa ating mga susunod na steps in the assessment of potential impacts using the steps 2 and 4 of the CDRA process and so forth. Now, part of scoping the potential impacts of climate change and disasters, we can also formulate yun pong ating impact chain diagrams. So, first thing is that we need to identify ano po ba yung climate stimulus, and then yung kanyang direct impact. And from that po ay matutukoy na rin natin ano po yung mga indirect impacts. For example, increase in precipitation. So this is the climate signal, climate stimuli. And then ang direct impact po niya is there is an increased incidence of flooding. So kapag po mataas yung precipitation, mataas yung pag-ulan, definitely ang immediate impact po niyan ay magkakaroon ng incidence of flooding. Now, pagka po nagkaroon ng incidence of flooding, what are the indirect effects? Magkakaroon ng damage sa mga kabahayan, contamination of water sources, pwede din namang masira yung ating mga agricultural production areas, and yung ating mga lifeline utilities ay lifeline facilities ay ganoon din maapektuhan din. And then we can go forth and i-detail po natin ano pa ba yung magiging impacts if this particular climate stimuli is experienced in our LGU. So pahaba po yan ang pahaba hanggang sa mag-lead po siya doon sa impact na doon sa mga tao mismo. So when there is damage, for example, in our agricultural production areas, magkakaroon ng unavailability of employment. So bababa din yung kanilang source of income. This can lead to other social problems and concerns. So pwede po natin diyang himay-himayin. So this is another example, again, sa agriculture. So hydrological drought. So yung drought, this immediately ultimately affects yung water stock reduction natin. So this leads to land cover conversion, or urban water supply decrease, and so forth. So yan, hanggang sa mag-lead na siya doon sa agricultural GDP loss ng region, because primarily yung drought naka-apekto siya doon sa production ng mga umaasa sa agriculture in the particular region. That's why definitely bababa din yung kanyang GDP. And then after mas-scope po natin yung potential impacts of climate change and disasters or hazards, we will now go with the establishment po ng ating exposure database. So dito po ay gumagawa tayo ng mga maps, exposure maps, so yung ating mga thematic maps, and we identify yung attributes po ng ating exposure sensitivity, adaptive capacity of various exposure units. Dito po natin binivisualize ano ba yung itsura nung risks na meron tayo doon sa ating area. So yun nga po, ginagawa natin siya through the formulation of thematic maps. So yung exposure database, this provides the baseline information pertaining to the elements of risk. Elements at risk refers to yung po kanina, yung population, yung ating assets, structures, and economic activities, and environmental resources, which are located, of course, in the areas exposed to potential impacts and climate change and damaging hazard events. So dito po, makikita na natin, mapipinpoint na natin yung sinasabi natin kanina, what portion of the population is most affected, yung ating urban areas. If yung urban areas po natin is already established, at up to what extent yung risk na kinakaharap po ng ating urban areas given na magkaroon ng ganitong klase ng event, extreme event, what are the tolerable amount of risk na pwede natin i-consider for us to pursue development in the areas na meron ding risk. So yun po, and yun pong ating resource-based production, lifeline utilities, and critical point facilities. Now, when we talk about the population, first, we are talking about yung people, ating mga residents, yung ating mga citizens. pag sinabing urban areas, this is composed of yung residential, commercial, industrial, tourism, cemeteries, parks, open spaces, and other unique urban uses. Yung natural resource-based production areas po. So ito yung mga production areas na, crop production areas, forest areas, and fisheries areas, lifeline utilities, transportation, communication, power and water, critical point facilities, educational facilities, health facilities, and other critical infrastructure facilities na meron po tayo. And so yan, from this we can formulate maps. Ano po? So yan na yung iba't ibang klase ng maps na ginagamit natin sa ating LGUs. So these are examples po ng mga exposure maps po natin. Okay. So population exposure map. So ito po, pinapakita dito yung areas where the population is mostly concentrated. Then we overlay po. So ino-overlay po natin dyan yung ating mga risk maps. So makikita agad natin doon. In essence, makikita natin kung ano-ano bang areas, especially with concentration, yung highly vulnerable and yung mataas yung risk pagdating sa mga natural hazards. So these are in form of shape files. So alam naman po natin yung mga shape files. This is a file format embedded with location. So yan po yung ginagamit natin for mapping. So these are the particular attributes po na pwede natin consider in the establishment of a database. So yun po yung type of housing unit, yung age, pagdating sa population, yung disability status, access to early warning systems. These are just a few of the things that we can definitely extend this depending upon the need for a more detailed analysis ng inyo pong risk assessments. So ito po yung sa urban use area and yung attributes po niya. So these are the things that we need to consider and include. So hindi ko na po ito iisa-isahin. So for natural resources-based production areas, so ang attributes niya, yung classification, variety produced, annual production per hectare, replacement cost, and number of dependent farmers, and critical point facilities, and so forth. Okay. So these are the few attributes po na pwede nating isama dun sa ating database. And then, given the attributes po, we can now proceed with the formulation po ng ating databases. For example, yung population database po natin, as you can see, nakalagay po dito yung exposure, yung mga barangay na exposed, gaano kalaki yung residential area, yung population nila, yung density, how concentrated the population is in that particular barangay. And then, we list the vulnerabilities. Pag sinabi natin vulnerabilities, sino ba yung higit na affected? So, nakalagay dito yung mga informal settlers na nandoon sa barangay. So, yung mga tao na nandoon sa living in dwelling units with walls made from light materials, young and old dependent. So, dito natin nilalagay yung characteristic ng particular area of interest. And then, release naman po yung adaptive capacity. So what are these adaptive capacity? Access to post-disaster financing, these are things that prevent them from our systems of interest from being affected by the effects, negative effects of hazards. And then, after we establish our database, we can now proceed po dun sa step 4 natin. So this is a combination of the climate change vulnerability assessment and disaster risk assessment. So again, just like the diagram that we have already showed before, risk is a interrelation between the climate stimuli which caused a disaster event, which caused a hazard that brings a disaster event, and it depends upon the levels of exposure, the adaptive capacity, and the sensitivity of exposed elements po natin. So this leads to direct impact and the succeeding indirect impacts. So mako-compute po natin yung risk. So this is a sample. Dun po, yan. This is just a sample of the computation po ng ating risk. So I think during the SIDRA activity po ninyo, kung napagdaanan nyo, ay ito po yung template na ginagamit. Meron na rin po itong calculations. So naka-formula na rin ito, and this provides with the scores po. And naka-categorize na rin po based on the information provided in the columns shown here kung ano yung risk category ng isang area of interest or isang decision area. So definitely, yung high risk areas po, yan po yung magiging focus ng ating interventions. Not only in the CDP but other sub-plans na meron po tayo kasi kailangan harmonize po yung ating plans. And then, ito naman po yung consequence analysis natin, consequence score matrix. So dito makikita po natin, depending upon the severity of consequence, in terms of population, natural resource, and urban use, critical point facilities, and lifeline utilities. So we can identify kung sila ay very high, depending upon yung score po. So pag sinabi nating very high yung category nila at ang severity of consequence nila ay may score na 4, ibig sabihin po for example, yung sa population, less than or equal to 20% of the population are affected and in need of immediate assistance. So kapag po more than 20% yung nangangailangan, then yung severity of consequence niya mataas na. Basically, yung risk niya ay very high upon analysis po ng ating data. So that is just one example on how we can use this matrix po to determine ano po ba yung risk na meron for that particular area. And then, if we compute po, so ginagawa lang po dito is we multiply yung severity of consequence score with the likelihood of occurrence. When we say likelihood of occurrence, so meron din po itong score kung very rare siya, for example, katulad nitong ating COVID pandemic, which happened around 100 years ago, so rare siya, so 2 yung score niya. But given the effect, the adverse effect of this disaster na mataas, so hindi lang siya local yung effect but global, so mataas din po yung kanyang magiging risk score. So it depends upon kasi for example yung population niya, yung population ang affected po niyan mas marami kasi global siya, global yung scope niya, therefore yung severity of consequence niya kahit mababa yung likelihood of occurrence niya, mataas po yung score niya. Okay, so these are also examples of yung maps natin. Okay, so, and of course, finally, after po nating makompute yung relative risk ng na meron tayo sa ating LGUs, na-identify natin at na-pinpoint po natin yung ating mga decision areas, we can now proceed to summarize yung findings natin. So, makikita na po natin doon sa ating mga mapa and even in our database, ano-ano ba yung mga areas kapag ka po nag-overlay tayo, ano ba yung mga areas natin which immediately needs attention, which needs intervention pagdating po doon sa implementation natin ng ating mga PPA, sino-sino ba yung mga dapat i-prioritize this, and of course, be useful doon po sa ating CDP formulation, basically because we are given a detailed view of the things that we should do depending upon yung pong risk na meron doon sa area natin relative to climate change and disaster risk reduction. So this is an example of a summarized finding in issues in matrix urban use areas o yung decision area natin. Nakalagay dyan kung anong particular barangay yung nangangailangan ng intervention. Basically, this barangay ay nakita doon sa analysis na may mataas na risk. So, dinescribe yung risk, ano yung mga hazards na present, ano yung possible impacts, and what are the interventions. And these interventions can translate, this will translate doon sa identification natin ng PPAs. So, lastly po, I just want to show you the process po. Although na-discuss na rin naman ito kanina, so I will not deal with this further. But, ipakita na lang po natin doon sa ating CDP process because this will be the topic of our discussions for the next couple of days. So lahat po dito sa process natin, pwede po natin ditong i-mainstream yung DRR and CCA. So for example, dun sa ating organization and mobilizing the planning team, so paano ba natin masisiguro na naka-mainstream doon ang DRR CCA? So in the composition of team, andyan po yung ating MDRRMO, for example. So dun sa membership, meron pong concern about DRR and CCA. Dun sa ating visioning, andun na rin po yung descriptor about CCA and DRR. And kapag po nailagay natin dyan sa submission, it will flow na po. Magta-translate na po siya dun sa mga susunod na mga proseso. At pinaka-importante po syempre, ma-include natin siya, ma-integrate natin siya doon sa ating ecological profile. Because basically, the ecological profile will provide us with all the information that we will be using in the process of formulating our comprehensive development plan. So kapag po nasa database natin yan, may information tayo, we will not be bothered by the concern na paano ba siya may pakikita dun sa mga susunod na process, paano ba siya magta-translate into programs and projects. Kung nandun na siya sa data, then we can see the scope of how big or how yung extent ng problem in terms of disasters, for example, in our localities, and we can provide more responsive actions and interventions to those kinds of problems. So overall po, yan po yung importance bakit natin ina-advocate na ma-mainstream ang DRRNCCA using yung ating climate and disaster risk assessment tool, basically to further yung development on the basis of mitigating the impacts of climate change and adverse effects of disastrous or disaster events in our locality. So yan po yung magiging focal point ng mga susunod na discussions, and hopefully yung pong participation natin magkaroon tayo ng full participation, dahil yung pong mga susunod na mga workshops will primarily deal with incorporating po yung DRRNCCA doon sa ating formulation. So, yun lang po, and thank you very much.